Hello, beloved. I am Pastor VictorResendiz. Welcome to this weekly series called God is Love, conversations on compassion, justice, and spirituality. Each week, we will explore our role as Christian believers in today's national dialogue around race and racism. We'll be joined by Liz Peterson, Assistant Director of Houston Coalition Against Hate, a network of organizations, institutions, and individuals committed to preventing and addressing all forms of hate in our community. We invite you to listen for the transforming Word of God, as together we seek to fully embody the great commandment to love God and love neighbor. Hello, everyone. We are back for our fourth conversation in the God is Love series. And today we have a wonderful guest, my colleague and friend, Pastor Colin Bagby. So welcome, Colin. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to do it and excited about our conversation.
Great. And again, welcome, Liz, walking us through our education part of this discussion. So we got some great stuff to talk about today. But I want to start more on the reflective part of our lives before we move towards education piece and then the reflection on scripture and how it enlightens us and also invites us to what we're going to talk about, inclusion. And then the education piece, we're going to talk about microaggressions and how we can detect those or even become aware of them now, maybe after Liz walks us to that piece. So what I did a couple of weeks ago, Liz helped me put together a couple of reflection questions to ask our clergy. And so I'm going to ask Pastor Colin to give us his take on this particular question. What or who has helped you become more aware of how race and racism are at work in your life and your community? What's your take on that?
Yeah, when I was reflecting on my question, I kind of was thinking about no kind of singular epiphany moment in my life, but there's been some kind of signpost moments along the way, or things I look back on oh, I remember that as a time where I kind of turned a page where I thought, or at least saw something a little bit differently. So the first one that really came to mind was something that at the time seemed not innocuous, but just a kind of thing that happened was that, so I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, not far away from Harrison, Arkansas, which is where the Klan is kind of centralized there still. And there's billboards there and, horrible stories about things that happen to people that go through Harrison. And I was in a band at the time and I played a show and my friends, he had a garage separate from his house. And we played a show there and we had handed out flyers at school and stuff. And a lot of people came and it was a high school sort of thing. And along with people showing up and kind of hanging out, and there were people there drinking and stuff too. Somebody was handing out these sampler CDs of white supremacist music. And I remember my parents and some of my friends' parents obviously being horrified, but kind of that as a signpost moment thinking oh, this isn't just in Harrison, and this is there are people in our community that are somehow we're connected to. And my best friend at the time, he was my pastor's son. And my pastor said something about it in a sermon weeks after about that this had happened and, how we think these things are far away from us, but they're close. And he got a death threat not long after that. And so just thinking about how I wasn't immune to it, or it was not, it was closer to me than I thought.
Wow.
That, and just kind of thinking about I'm in my head a lot. I like to read and think and stuff like that. And thinking about, another moment was Trayvon Martin being killed while I was in college, and kind of having this thought of there are things I never have to think about. And saying that to myself as a self-described thinking person.
Sure.
It's not even things that I don't think about. There are plenty of things that I don't think about, but there are some things that I don't have to think about,
sure.
Wearing a hoodie or out walking at night or something like that.
Sure.
Stereotypically, I'm the person that, is kind of told I should be scared if I'm walking out at night, not and for a different reason, like that I'm gonna get hurt or something.
Yes.
And so just that thought, and still trying to remind myself of that there are things that I never have to think about or do. And then kind of along the way, like I worked as a prison chaplain my first year of seminary, and that was kind of a signpost moment for me. I walked over the Edmund Pettus Bridge with some seminary students while I was in seminary. So it was just kind of these things where I was opened up to that idea that there are some things that I never have to think about or remember as part of my history, and to try to remind myself that I should think about those things on behalf of others. So
I like the description you're giving as a signpost, because for me, what comes to mind right away as a signpost is this progression in my journey. Signposts begin to open up my knowledge or my awareness in this case, which is something that Liz and I have been touching on these past few weeks with the conversations, is inviting people that not only in the awareness of racism, but also in our own spiritual or growth in our faith, that would be a progression of growth and deepening. And so this is a perfect description of that as a signpost. I like that because, as you move on, what ends up happening, you become more in tune that there are signposts ahead and to look out for them, right? And to be for them. So I really like that description. Liz, any take on this same question? What has helped you become more aware of how race and racism are at work in your life, in your community?
Wow. Well, just every day, I feel like I come upon a new experience, and every time someone that's close to me shares with me the way that being Black or being Latino affects their life, those are moments that I deeply treasure, because I know that it takes a lot of trust to be honest about the experiences that you have, particularly as we'll get into my education piece as a little preview. One common microaggression is to diminish the reality of what a person has experienced, and to say, oh, I'm sure they didn't mean it like that, or don't you think you're taking it a little too personally? So those experiences have really moved me.
Sure. Yeah. And on the other side, as a person of color, I can tell you the very first time I experienced direct, just offensive racism towards me. I immigrated here in 1979 when I was 8 years old. So you guys can do the math. I was in third grade. So I didn't speak, English. So I only knew a few words, what have you. And it was the school I went to was predominantly English speaking, and everybody looked like you guys, and so I remember one time in the cafeteria, somebody called me a wetback. And I had no clue what the hell that was. And so I went home and I asked I remember, yes, and I think I told you this story before, Liz. I remember replying, I was a kid. And the only thing that occurred to me to reply was like, my back's not wet, So that was my logic. Is like, why they call me my wetback when my back's not wet? So I went home and I told this story, and I remember my grandfather describing what that meant. And here I am, a 8-year-old and a third grader going, why in the hell would they say that to me? Like, and it hit me that they were trying to hurt me. And so that was the very first time I ever experienced someone attacking me for not being a part of how everybody else looked or being from the same place. And then the other, speaking of signposts, Colin, my father was a very astute man, and he was just very aware of everything and socially. And I remember he was an auto mechanic, and when I started driving, and he would lend me the car or whatever, and he would always say, listen to me, if a cop ever stops you, he says, make sure you say the least possible. Make sure, he says, do not react to the provocative tone of voice they're going to use with you. No clue. I was like, I have no idea what he's talking about, whatever. So the very first time I got stopped by a cop, my first car was a Camaro. So you could just imagine, and and I got stopped for speeding or whatever. And sure enough, that provocative tone of voice was like so evident, because I remember it from school. When I was in school, the way even the police officers we had at our high school, the way they would speak to the Latino kids or the Black kids versus the white kids was completely different. And I just put that thing together, and I was like, holy, my dad was right. And so all I could think about is at that moment was like, thank God he told me that, because it did strike a nerve, the way he was like just very authoritative, over authoritative, when all I was saying was, yes, sir. I wasn't provoking. I know that's sometimes the misconception that we get from the media that, oh, well, if they only follow orders, if they only, no, seriously, sometimes that's all you are really saying is just, yes, sir. You're replying to their questions or whatever. And so anyways, those were the two things that really marked me as a child and then as a teenager, to realize, oh yeah, I'm going to be treated different, and so I need to be very careful in my spaces and be more aware of how I carry myself, and even tone down my Latino passion blood, whatever. So anyways, it's just fascinating. So now with that, I want to build the bridge to our conversation with Liz about microaggressions and how they sneak up on us and how they're there, but we don't realize them, or we don't realize that that's where it's coming from. So Liz, you want to take us there?
Sure. Let me share my screen here.
There you are.
I can make it bigger. There we go. So yes, today we're talking about recognizing and avoiding microaggressions. And I want to preface this by saying that about 2 or 3 months ago, I came upon a teacher who gave me a new word for this. Their name is Tiffany Jana, and they have written a book, and Subtle Acts of Exclusion. Because microaggressions feels very hard and very sandpapery, and it can provoke those defensive feelings that we've talked about in our past sessions. And so what we mean when we say microaggression or subtle act of exclusion is something that's done that makes someone feel like they don't belong. So when I talk about what is a microaggression, Daryl Wing Su is the social scientist, psychologist who kind of coined that original phrase and did a lot of research in that area. And they say microaggressions are the everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults. This is important, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostility, hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. So we talked in one of the first sessions about the fact that we all have a variety of identities that can be in greater power or less power depending on the setting. So one of our identities can be our gender. And we often see microaggressions related to our gender, which is something that I think helped me understand what it meant, because I can remember being told to make the coffee at a meeting, even though I was definitely not the receptionist or the person, the helper in charge of coffee making. I was a peer to all the other people in the meeting, but somehow I was expected to take the service role. I know that both men and women get comments about their hair. You look more professional with shorter hair, or you look prettier with your hair down, or I can't pay attention to you with your hair like that. You'll make comments. Someone will make a comment. You never know she's smart. She's so pretty. Or you don't look like an engineer. You don't look like if you're a male nurse, you don't look like a nurse. Whatever we imagine people should be based on their appearance, and that they don't fit that stereotype we have. If we make a comment about that, that can be a microaggression. Another one is not just women who can receive it. Men who are showing emotion can be the recipients of microaggressions. Man up, as if men aren't allowed to feel emotions, or he's being such a girl, as if there's something wrong with being a girl, having feminine characteristics, or that some behavior can be derided as being woman-like. So all of these, as I mentioned, are based on our unconscious biases, which is something that we hear a lot about these days. They're something that develop over the course of our lifetime, beginning at a very early age, through everything we see and hear, or don't see or don't hear. And since they reside deep in our subconscious, they don't necessarily align with our declared beliefs, or even reflect stances we would explicitly endorse. But sometimes they leak out into our words or actions, and we can call those leaks microaggressions. So this slide kind of goes along with what I was just saying. It translates where are the unconscious biases, and how do they leak out into microaggressions. So women being lower status employees, or there's a right way to look like a woman or a man, that men can't show their emotions. So this comes out a lot of times in racial or ethnic ways. So racial microaggressions, as we can see here, there's a variety of them. They can be related to your voice. You speak English so well, you're so articulate, you don't sound Black, you don't act Black, as if there's something wrong with Blackness. Your name is too hard to pronounce. Can I call you Mary? Whatever. Mixing up people who, if there are 2 Black women at your office, I guarantee they don't look as similar as you think they do. We are much more attuned to seeing the differences in white faces, because we see more white faces as white people, particularly upper middle class white people who live in a sort of mainly white atmosphere. So when you call Susan Carol, that hurts both of them very deeply. And so that's another thing that we're going to talk about. The pain of microaggressions is anything but micro. They can also be religion. You're not like other Muslim people. Like, there's a certain way to be Muslim. I know, Victor, you get this a lot. Where are you from? Mm-hmm. No, where are you really from? No, where are you really, really from? Mm-hmm. And
I had somebody tell me one time, "Thank you so much for not having an accent." Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Sorry about that. But yeah, anyways.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could give a whole 40-minute presentation about the microaggressions that you've faced, even just in the time that I've known you, that I've heard. And for that matter, so can other members of the clergy that I've heard of, that have received them based on, you can receive it based on your gender, on your gender appearance, like what is considered masculine or feminine, on your weight, on your age, on your the tone or sound of your voice. These are all things that can make you feel like you don't belong. Mm. And as I said, it's about more than hurt feelings. And one thing that I liked seeing that I couldn't show because I didn't want to have a little problem with the video again, but there's a video where it shows racial or all microaggressions as like mosquito bites. And one mosquito bite is annoying, and 5 mosquito bites are like pretty annoying, but it's like being constantly bitten by mosquitoes day after day on top of other mosquito bites your entire life, and you just really begin to hate mosquitoes, right? So Dr. Roberto Montenegro, who studies microaggressions and mental health, describes it as follows: "It isn't about having your feelings hurt. It's about how being repeatedly dismissed and alienated and insulted and invalidated reinforces the difference in power and privilege, and how this perpetuates racism and discrimination." So this is one of those things that I would never say anyone who's listening to this, or anyone who has ever gone to Memorial Drive United Methodist, would wake up in the morning and think, I want to commit a racial microaggression, or I want to hurt some people today. No, we would never do that. I don't believe that at all. But we do these things unintentionally. And what we're here to learn, as Maya Angelou says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So let's talk about how to do better. For one thing, we can examine our own unconscious biases and stereotypes and not make assumptions about anyone's background, interests, or preferences. For example, I know it's very tempting when you see someone who's very tall, particularly a tall Black man, to ask him if he plays sports. I can see how that doesn't seem like it would be hurtful. But if that tall Black man is actually an anesthesiologist, it feels to him like all you see when you see him. Well, I can't say what it feels like. I can say what I've been learning about, right? So it can feel to that person like all they look like is a ball player and all their value is in entertainment and in sportsmanship, which there's nothing wrong with being a ball player and having athletic prowess. But our society values Black men for their athletic prowess rather than for their intellectual ability and their contributions to society. So that little statement that you might make at the deli counter is a microaggression. And we're going to talk about what to do if you realize that you've done that, okay? We also don't want to expect individuals to represent their entire group. So it's not great, as much as we want to, when we're in a class, a Sunday school, a small group, any group at work, and something Black comes up, to immediately turn and look at the only Black person and kind of put them in the position of, well, what is the Black opinion on this? Or, I mean, I can't say that it's not 100% human nature to do that. So no one's saying you're a bad person for doing that, but it's saying as you recognize that tendency in yourself, just try to unpack that and put yourself in their shoes. If you were in a situation where you were the only representative, the only woman, or the only Christian, would you want an entire group of people to expect you to account, let's just say, for all Christianity, when we all admit that Christians are represented in very different ways? So the way that an ultra-fundamentalist evangelical Christian looks at the world doesn't have very much to do with the way that a mainline Methodist looks at the world. So you also want to diversify your networks. And I know that that's not easy as far as where we live to create authentic, organic friendships. But one thing you can do to start is to diversify your social media and the other media that you consume, television shows, news sites, any websites or blogs that you can follow, and educate yourself about the experience and struggles of other groups so that you can reflect on how your behavior might be unintentionally feeding into those struggles.
I appreciate you saying that. Give me one quick second on that. I appreciate you saying that because, like Colin and I that have been to seminary, this is where we learned that there were other theologians rather than the European voice. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
And we started learning these other people of color have written incredible theological perspectives that, I mean, at least for me, I had always thought it was the European take on things. I don't know, you know, what you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, what you saying that just reminds me of a James Cone quotation that I've heard a lot, which I think is really helpful in thinking about, you know, microaggression is actually a manifestation of something deeper, like under the surface. Like it comes out because there's something else there. You know, thinking about like you may have leukemia and you get like bumps all over your body. Like the bumps are small, but they're telling you something bigger. You know.
Correct. Right.
And so the James Cone quotation I think is really helpful is in Crossing the Lynching Tree. He says, white people learned about the cross through the Bible and Black people learned about the Bible through the cross. So like that makes you think more about that perspective of reading theology or thinking about the Christian tradition is like, oh, like that's another one of those things I never have to think about is like, I know about the cross conceptually, And someone like Martin Luther King knows about the cross experientially, or Emmett Till, or, you know, the list is long,
Sure.
and how what we're expressing when we, you know, commit a microaggression is that we're carrying around that like, I've only ever read Karl Barth and N.T. Wright, so it's like, and not that they're bad scholars,
No, sure,
like
sure.
that, but
Yeah.
that you carry around like, oh, they're smart. So then when I read James Cone, I'm like, oh wow, he's so articulate, you know, like, oh, that tells you something about my educational background or something.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I just wanted to make that quick parenthesis, Liz. I didn't want to interrupt you, but just
Not at all. Yeah, please do jump in whenever.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Otherwise, I'm just going to charge ahead.
Yeah.
So if somebody, let's just say that you're at a PTA meeting, a work meeting, a meeting in the church, and it comes to your attention that you have hurt someone's feelings, or that that either the person whose feelings were hurt or someone else in the meeting reflects on to you later, and you realize, oh no, what I've done is I've committed a microaggression. What do I do? And I really like this, this diversity consultant had come up with something along these lines, which is, to remember it, called barrel. So the first part is breathe, because one of the first instincts that we have as a human being, being told you did something wrong, is to become very defensive and to enter into kind of a fight, flight, or freeze mode. So if you take a breath and realize that this is not the end of the world, you won't die of embarrassment, you won't, nobody's attacking your character or fundamental goodness. Just wait a beat before you respond. That's actually really good advice just in life in general.
Emotional intelligence 101, I guess. It's like, it doesn't matter how you meant it, it matters how it was heard, you know.
Exactly. And that is something that is so important to learn in racial justice education, is that the impact of your words is by far more important than the intent of what you meant. Again, something that can be revolutionary in your marriage, in your raising of a child, in your interaction with any other human being. But in an interracial situation, it's especially important because when you reply and say, I didn't mean it that way, I would never, I'm not a racist, you're taking it to, you're being too sensitive. All of that is making it so much worse, rather than just respecting the fact that their feelings were hurt, that they're a different person than you with a different life experience than you, and that the way that your words landed was hurtful. Mm-hmm. So I say respect, because it is deeply courageous to, as a person of color, to tell a white person that they felt hurt by something that was said or done. That the fact that they have told you means that they value your relationship, or at least they value you enough to feel that you will you will take it seriously and you will potentially change. Otherwise, they would just probably ignore it and chalk it up to, you're just another problematic white person that they can't trust. So I would encourage spending some time reflecting on what was said. Again, this can mean in the moment. It can mean over the course of the next day, or in some cases over the course of years later, you'll realize something will click with you, and you'll realize that's why that behavior was considered hurtful. If it's appropriate or timely to express remorse, to take accountability for what you said and for how, for what you're going to do about committing to being different, and to learn from this experience. Yeah. So one question that we tackled a little bit last week was about interrupting racism, or what to do if you see it. If you see someone, or you're in a conversation with someone who's using racial stereotypes, or talking derogatively about people of color or people with marginalized identities. And so I came up with a couple of additional ideas that you can use. These are particularly good in a situation where you're like a Sunday school class, a committee meeting, PTA meeting, work meeting, something like this, where you are not in an intimate relationship with a person, and you're trying to, in the moment, diffuse or redirect the conversation. So restating and paraphrasing is a way that gives the speaker the opportunity to hear, reflect on, and possibly consider their words. So it's also best to use I instead of you statements. For example, you might say, I noticed that you complimented Victor for not having an accent. I've said stuff like that in the past, but then I realized I was assuming that just because someone was Latino, they probably wouldn't speak proper English. That's pretty unfair when you think about how many Latinos have lived in the United States for 2, 3, or 4 or more generations. Another thing that you can use is strategic questioning, which can help the speaker consider different viewpoints and options, saying, could you say more about what you mean by that? Or how have you come to think that? May subtly encourage the speaker to reconsider their point, or may help you to identify ways to explain why that statement might be offensive or oppressive to certain groups. So that's what I've got for this week.
Yeah. Thank you so much with so much information. Any reflection or anything that comes to mind, Colin, based on what you heard? Or
I think something that I learned and was kind of unaware of until I paid attention to it is how, as a white person, how often people will say those sorts of things to me as a way to like test me out, to see like if I will have a kind of gossipy conversation with them about another person. So like, for instance, say we were to turn that situation with you, Victor, to like somebody comes up to me and is like, isn't it nice that Victor doesn't have an accent or something? Like, and sometimes people will use that as kind of like a elbow to be like, do you think like I do? Or do you think, you know? And it's not that often, but occasionally people will do that. And really what they're trying to see is like, will I participate in their weird perspective, you know? Yeah. Or like I have some friends from seminary are married and they're different races, and was asked one time like what I thought their parents might think, which is like, it's weird because I know what they're asking, and in that moment I really didn't have a helpful response. Instead, you know, I didn't want to be a jerk and kind of blow up on them and be like, what kind of question is that, idiot? Yeah. But at the same time, like, oh wow, people really use that stuff. It's just like a tribalistic thing of like, who around me is also thinking this, you know?
Absolutely.
Wow.
So
Absolutely.
Really good.
And do you feel like you've developed a way to answer questions like that?
I think my mechanism here recently is to make them feel more awkward about it. So like when they say like, what do you think their parents think? To just kind of ask the opening question and be like, what do you mean by that? Or like, what do you think about that? Or, you know, like, I don't understand the question. Can you rephrase it in a different way? Yeah. And then it kind of makes them think about what they asked. Because you know, I feel awkward, so I guess my defense mechanism is to like keep that back onto them. Like, you should feel awkward about this. I shouldn't, you know.
Yeah.
That's really a very like calm but effective way. And I have two reflections on that. One is that at the Houston Coalition Against Hate, one thing that I've been learning is that hate, just like you hear about serial killers who start out by sort of like burning ants with a magnifying glass and then step up to maybe like neighborhood pets go missing. People who hate do not start out with hate crimes. They start out with small test, you know, hateful opinions coming out. And when those are not challenged, they grow bolder and will become more assertive in their expressions of hatred. Now, that's probably not going to happen at Memorial Drive, but that goes to my second point, which is the psychology of wanting to be right and wanting to think what's the right thing to think. So if we establish a culture in Memorial Drive where the right thing to think is that all races are created equal by our God and God loves everyone and racism is absolutely unacceptable, not only will it drive some people underground who might be hardcore committed to bigotry,
Sure.
But really it will show other people who are not really sure, where am I supposed to sit in this day and age of Black Lives Matter, that the people that I value hold these beliefs, and so I will too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what you both are saying, I think about it again on the other side of the perspective. You know, I think about the word inclusion, and the very first thing that a person of color feels about being excluded starts sometimes with their name or the pre-assumptions of who they are. And so you immediately, if you're aware or more experienced, like you know, that you're aware with this kind of, I would say unconscious rejection, or sort of like letting you know that you're the other, then your stance is to just then be careful where you are, and you know that you are excluded. So what I mean by that is, for instance, you know, and I see this a lot, and I hear this a lot. There's not a sensitivity to invest in somebody's names, the pronunciation of someone's name. That's not the more common one. And so what they'll do is either chop it up, don't try. You mentioned earlier, Liz, you know, well, I'm just going to call you this. And what happens is that the name is something of an identity. It reminds me also in the Hebrew, you know, when in the Old Testament when they named children, it was based on something meaningful. And so a lot of the person of color, and I know in part of the Black community, the name is an identification of the roots of where we come from, or our ethnicity, you know? And so it's something very respectful among us, either, or meaningful in another sense too. And so when we hear someone dismiss that in our name, that already is a major message of you're other. So you're not, you know, you're just other, and other, you can hang out with us, but just know that we're not going to take our time to invest in your identity and who you are. And so it may be something very trivial in some people that think, oh, your name, really? No, but it really means a lot when somebody tries, you know, to say, oh, your name is Fatima. You know, I have a sister named Fatima. Growing up, I would hear this a lot of dismissal on her name. You know, well, do you have a middle name? Yeah, Maria. Okay, well, I'm going to call you Mary. It's like, no.
Yeah, right. That's not my name.
Her name is Fatima. You know, and so we would get I would hear that a lot. You know, Victor is a little easier to pronounce, but it is dismissing, and right away it's sort of, like I said, just a prompt message that you're other.
Yeah.
So don't, you know, we're not going to get to know you. And for someone as personable as I am, because I like to make connection, that immediately, again, when I was growing up, maybe I was a little bit more sensitive about it, I get my feelings hurt, but now I've become more like, okay, that's where they are, and that's fine, and I will stand here and invest when I need to, and you know, remove myself when I need to, which is, you know, but then again, you know, then I don't find authentic connection anymore, and then I'm just kind of like just there to contribute to what I need to, and then get out of there.
There's psychology behind that too, of like hearing your own name and hearing it pronounced correctly.
That's right.
Like, I get upset when people spell Colin with 2 L's, which is insignificant, really. And it's certainly insignificant when people hear, like, you know, somebody says like, oh, uses the phrase normal name. Like, oh, it's hard because it's not a normal name. Or like,
Sure.
we're doing these, doing confirmation and baptism. And sometimes, like, you have to ask because you struggle with a name.
That's right.
But I'm reminded of times of people saying like, oh, that was really hard because their name isn't a normal name or a reminder to it.
Right.
And how important it is to hear your own name and to hear it well, and not to be told like, well, that's too difficult for me. Like that says more about you than it does about the person.
That's correct. That's correct.
Like, oh, that's too hard.
That's
like,
right.
It's easy if you just say, help me pronounce it, you know?
That's right. And it's a gesture of hospitality, because I'm receiving you. I'm willing to welcome you. But if I don't take the time, it's almost like you're just there, you know, just, you know, kind of like the message that's given. Yeah. Absolutely.
And a gesture of humility as well, because there's a reason that we can't pronounce a lot of names, because the phonemes used in English are not the same phonemes used entirely in Spanish, which is a very closely related language, let alone a language that has, you know, an Asian completely different system of using the voice and the mouth to make sound.
Yeah.
I didn't like consciously learn that until graduate school. But that really just opened up for me an understanding of why I can't understand when some people, you know, there's the common way that we make fun of the way that Asian people pronounce words. I love the movie A Christmas Story, but it's super racist in that regard. And you laugh because, haha, they're so dumb. They can't say Mary. They say Mary. But you don't think about the fact like that they know, this is another thing about people who know multiple languages. Somebody struggling to learn to speak in English, you think they're so stupid. They probably know like 300,000 words in their language, and they know 300 or 3,000 words in your language. And, you know, how many languages do you speak exactly? So, you know, we have these assumptions, these very egotistical assumptions, like that we're primary, we're the best, we're the first, we're the preferred. And that's normal. Like, I remember being a little kid, I was reflecting on this. I remember being like my daughter's age, she's 6, and going to my church, First Baptist Church in West Newton, Pennsylvania. And we do have a really beautiful stained glass window, but just thinking that I go to the fanciest, most important, most prominent, wonderful church in the whole entire world. And how did I get so lucky to be at this amazing, I mean, bless our hearts. We have, you know, like less than 100 members, and, you know, we're not exactly like even the largest, most popular church in my small town, you know, but that's the way that we white folks sometimes walk through the world, like just with this childlike awe of our amazingness. And it takes some maturity to realize that there is nothing wrong with First Baptist Church of West Newton. That it's a wonderful place to be from, and to be a part of, but that there are other places that are also great to worship God, and that have different ways of doing that. Correct.
No, I love that. Colin, I want to ask you about reflecting on this. I know we've been, our sermons have been covering Romans chapter 12. I'm going to these couple of verses, and I'd love to have your take on this, and you as well, Liz. So Romans chapter 12, verse 15 through 18 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so as far as it depends on you, live peacefully with all." What do y'all think about that? And before I get your reflections, I was telling Liz last week, Colin, that we romanticize scripture a lot. Like our series, God is love. It's like, oh, such a beautiful, you know, such a wonderful, such a wonderful phrase, right? But do we really genuinely deepen it in our lifestyle, in the way we actually see others, and the reflection of the image of God in others, right? So that's why I read this, because it has that sort of flow of poetry. But I don't know, what's your take on it, Colin?
I always hang on that, so far as it depends on you. So like, just think about what that thing is like. Take some responsibility. like, thinking about the whole corpus of Paul's writings, he talks a lot about what we say is like cruciformity, like having a cross-shaped disposition, which is to say like a deeply sacrificial disposition, a disposition that wouldn't say, well, that's not how I meant that.
Correct.
Or, well, you're just being too sensitive, or, well, that's just weird, and so that's why I said it different. Like this kind of defensive, like the cross is not defensive. The cross is kenosis, like that pouring out of yourself totally. And so I always hang up on that, like so insofar as it depends on you. So just a hypothetical situation, maybe somebody was overly defensive, or somebody was sensitive to something that you said, and in the grand scheme of things, they probably took it too seriously or something like that.
Sure.
So say that situation exists. Even if that were the case, and I think 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. You probably did say something offensive.
Yeah.
As a Christian, you cut that out of your perspective and say like, correct. Okay, it doesn't matter really my intent then.
Sure.
What matters is that I am sacrificial in my ego and my pride, really.
Yes.
Like sacrifice that first. Like
correct.
Sacrifice yourself first. If someone's hurt, you say you're hurt, and that matters. That's being correct. Hurt matters, not not my intent doesn't beat your hurt.
Correct.
And so I think this chapter of Romans is really helpful in kind of really putting like skin on that main idea of the faith is the self-sacrificial,
that's correct,
cross-shaped life,
And so, and I love that self-sacrificial. For me, what it represents is to be genuine, to be authentic. So genuinely care about somebody, to authentically seek connection. So you're right, whether in my radar that's oversensitive or not, it doesn't matter. The fact that I'm seeking authentic, genuine connection, that's the intentionality of our faith. I am going to remove any ego tripping in me. Not that doesn't matter either, but it is, speaking of signposts, that's a signpost of me maybe bringing more to God and saying, why does this still trigger my ego for somebody to tell me that I've offended them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What's any reflections from your part, Liz?
I just love what Colin was saying, and it really amplifies what I meant by the mosquito bite mentality, because if you say to somebody in line at the deli counter, you look like an athlete, you look like a ball player, no, like that isn't the worst thing in the world you could say to someone, and there are times and places when that would be appropriate. So I think it gets very confusing and you feel like it can't do anything right. So I love the idea of take yourself out of it and just imagine, like, not imagine, but just allow them to have their own experience. Is this the 100th time they've been told that? Or did they have an experience earlier today that was very racially painful that this brings up? Or do they feel constantly guarded around white people because they have had bad experiences in the past?
Sure.
Pouring yourself out, I think is the most important thing you can do as a white person to advance your racial awakening. Is to just say,
absolutely,
my experience in the world doesn't matter.
Yeah, and you'll be surprised that many people, and I'm speaking from my own journey into maturity, the seasons where I was most defensive, I was the most oversensitive. So it goes hand in hand. So if you're very defensive about your ego is because you're oversensitive too. And so it's just, it's ironic that happens.
Victor, one quick thing.
Please.
I think something that, and you touched on this, Liz, and I think it's really important to like really zero in on this. For me, it was in particular, is that when we say microaggression, I think sometimes people think micro, that prefix refers to its significance. And so, like that's the big piece of it. And to really talk about like that, really just talking about like, no, it's the micro is actually referring to you, of like what you think is small is actually really significant. And a helpful exercise for me is to think about, so that the you look like an athlete thing is to amplify that to its like most offensive extent. And for me, it's thinking about the way people described and talked about Michael Brown as this kind of imposing, strong, scary figure. You say that to somebody, that's amplified for them in that moment to say like, I'm scary. Like I'm meant to be feared because I'm imposing and strong and I hurt them, for instance. So like if you say something like that and somebody says, you know, that's offensive to me or that's harmful to me, then amplify it in your mind. It's like, oh, when I say, oh, it's nice that Victor doesn't have an accent, it's like, because, you know, at that end, it's like, because I don't like people with accents, or people with accents are not valued, or something like that. Like you take it to an extent like, oh, I see how a pile of that says something a lot more than what I think I said, you know?
No, I love that. Love that. To wrap this up, this conversation, thank you, Colin, again for joining us. I hope you're able to join us in the next series as and I prepare it. I just think it's so valuable to hear our clergy speak out on this, because you know, I hear their reflections, but I also want them to, you know, voice them out to the world. And Liz, again, thank you again for the education piece. Again, we're learning so much on that side of the gaining information and gaining knowledge. And I just want to encourage everyone that some of our tendency is to gain knowledge and want to immediately go outside and save the world. This is lifetime work. So it has to start with us first. And that's okay. Like if you're going through that season of gaining this type of knowledge, this type of information that Liz is bringing to us, learn it first and learn to reflect in it as well. And then that's why we're bringing the spiritual piece, because God will guide you to what that first step looks like. The application is first in your life, and then little by little, God will open opportunities for you to start contributing your voice or your privilege or your presence, whatever that looks like, in whatever circle he's calling you towards in this cause. So don't feel so frustrated that the iron is hot right now and racism and everybody's got it. We got to do something about it, because what ends up happening, we'll fumble our way through it and then get disencouraged. So I just wanted to say that to y'all. I want to leave y'all with this message, or this experience from Father Greg Boyle. Father Greg Boyle leads a major ministry called Homeboy Industries in East LA. He's been leading there for 30 years. And he's worked with restoring that community with the gang culture that, you know, that's been there for years and years. And he talks about kinship. And when he talks about this word, which is both of his books, Tattoos of the Heart and Barking at the Choir, those two are wonderful books. But he talks about kinship a lot, and is based on his own experience as a white male. He says that when he went, you know, he had the same privilege, upbringing, things like that. And when he went to his first mission trip to Bolivia, he learned that when we are in a privileged position, when we go into a mission to help or to a charity or anything like that, we have this sort of over somebody kind of attitude or demeanor that we're going to go help, we're going to go save them, we're going to go take them out of their misery or whatever. And he learned that very quickly that was not the case, that the case was, he was so moved by the people of Bolivia in the community that he served for 2 years, that what he understood that kinship was, that instead of having an attitude, let me go reach them, it was more of let me be reached. And he brought that back to his ministry, and that's how he's built it. And I think this is applicable to what we're saying today, is that the acknowledging, the respecting of someone's name, the being aware of microaggressions, whether they're intentional or intentional, is leaning towards genuine kinship of saying, how can I be reached? How can I be touched in this experience with this other person that doesn't look like me, that doesn't come from the same background, that doesn't speak like me, that may have an accent or not, but what can I lend myself in the kenosis that Colin walked us through for us to receive something new about us and the reflection of the image of God in this other person. And so, so this is how Father Greg Boyle describes kinship. It's not serving the other, but being one with the other. And so I think this is the perfect way to end our conversation today, because that's what it's about. And that's something that when I read his book, I'd say about 8 years ago, that impacted my way of doing ministry. Instead of feeling like I was the one with the answer, it was more like, how can I be reached in this experience wherever I'm going to be serving, whether it is here locally or going to a mission trip somewhere, outside of the United States. Anyways, thank you so much to you both. You guys are a big part of my ministry and a big part of my life, and I really appreciate both of you and value both of your wisdom. So thank you so much, Liz. Again, I'll see you next week. Colin, I'll see you Sunday.
Sunday for confirmation, yeah.
We got confirmation. Wear comfortable shoes, brother.
I will.
Any closing thoughts, anything from you guys?
I had not heard that kinship definition before. I think that's really great. Just thinking about like, if God's mission is to reconcile all things and all people, like what are we doing to like go against that grain? I think is a thing I try to think about a lot. So yeah, thanks for sharing that definition. I still have not read any Greg Boyle. I'll get on it ASAP.
I'll bug you about it. Colin and I recommend music to each other all the time and books, and it's just wonderful. So we text each other. The other night, I didn't want to text him in the middle of the night because I found this wonderful music piece, and I'm like, no, I better wait. I don't want to, bother him in the middle of the night. So anyways, but that's kind of our connection. Thanks again, Colin.
Yeah, you bet.
Liz, anything?
No.
Thoughts?
Not at all.
All right, great. Well, we'll see you guys next week, and thanks a lot for joining us. Keep the comments and the questions coming. We are so glad you joined us for this week's conversation. You're invited to leave any comments or questions in the comments below. I want to leave you with these encouraging words from Jesus from the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. We'll see you next time.